Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Robotic Milking Edition. I'm your host, Marcia Andrews, data science professor and extension specialist at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul. With us today, we also have your co-host, Jim Sulfur, dairy extension educator at the St. Cloud Regional Office. Hi, Jim.
Hi, and welcome, everyone.
So before we get going and invite our producer to join us, I would like to remind or make aware for those of you who are watching this webinar as a recording that you can register at z.umn.edu/30 MINRM to join us virtually and participate in a discussion. So we would like you who are here today to ask your questions using the Q&A box. If you hover your mouse, you find it on the bottom of the screen. Please do not use the chat box. We're not going to be monitoring the chat box, and it becomes a little disturbing also for the attendees. So please use the Q&A box when you have a question. Either Jim or I will ask the question on your behalf for the producer to respond to. It's my pleasure to invite Jeremy to join us today. Jeremy is a dairy producer from Wisconsin, and he milks, and you disappeared, Jeremy, somehow. You were here just a minute ago. I don't see you anymore. That's interesting. Okay, now I see you back. Perfect. Jeremy is joining us from Wisconsin, and he's going to give us a 10-minute or so overview of their robotic milking facility. And then we'll open up for questions. Thank you again, Jeremy, for taking time today in a busy, probably already harvest season going and nice day to join us to tell your fellow dairy producers and others that work in the dairy industry how you're managing your robotic dairy. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We constructed our facility in 2016. We started up in September and came out of an existing tie saw barn and went into this, built a 6-row cross vent setup with 2 VMS. So when we started in 2016, this is the VMS 300 that is here now. We milked for 3 or 4 years with what is now called the classic DLL VMS, and at that time in 2020 we traded in and upgraded and installed 2 of the VMS 300s, and that was a pretty interesting change, I guess, on things that I saw with it. I think that there was a lot better attachments, so we saw an increase in milking speed, and the goal going into it was to increase capacity through the barn and through the robots by about 15% in terms of milk volume through them, and we did achieve that on a consistent basis. So I was very happy making that upgrade to it, and I felt like we can do the rear udders on cows a lot, especially heifers, a lot. It attaches a lot easier. We had a lot less incompletes on that, and I think that it tremendously impacted our cell count too. So next slide. Again, 2 VMS. We run in one robot room right now. So we have 2 pens, 60 group pens on either side of that. And so on the back side is our utility room with our hot water heater and the vacuum pumps and everything like that. And we've since installed a 3rd unit. We're about 3 months into it with a separate, almost identical to this robot room right next to this, with the thought of overcrowding our existing pre-stalls slightly. Instead of having 60 cows and 60 stalls, putting about 90 cows in there, so overcrowding it by like 50%, and utilizing the barn itself a little bit more than trying to maximize the robot itself. This is just an overview of what our barn pretty much looks like. So it's a lower ceiling, a 112 pitch roof. We have a cross vent as we're looking at it, going from left to right. There's a VES ventilation system on it. So there's 5 cyclone fans hanging from the ceiling. Those are all variable speeds, so ramp up and slow down, spring, fall, winter, whatever, as temperatures change. I really like that. Looking at different facilities and different layouts, there's kind of either it seemed like you go with the baffle system or with the fans, to keep air down or moving over the tops of cows and over the backs of cows. And I just really liked how much cleaner the farm looked. I thought there was a little better air movement with the fans on it. I'm really happy that we went with that choice. It seems like even in our hotter weather, we can keep air speeds up and we can keep bunching and things like that from becoming an issue, and never really skip a beat when we hit any kind of heat. So we had to complete the BS system, then there's a vented curtain, and that's on drives, temperature controlled and humidity controlled. And then I think we have 12 or 13 exit fans you can see over here on the right hand side of it. So our pens are split. It's kind of tough to see a little bit right now. So we're looking at one. There's a sort gate that's kind of right in the center of the facility. You're right in the center of this picture with our robot room. You can just see a corner of it way on the right hand side of it. So this is what I guess would be called a milk per system. So cows, when they come, they can only walk one way around this stall. So there's one point to access feed, and that's through a sort gate that's right in the center of that picture. And that we can tell whether they have access to go into the milking robots or whether it kicks them out and they can go eat. So I guess in my opinion, I just think that cows just want to go eat, and that's what drives them to go through the robot and makes them want to go through that. And once they're kicked out to eat or in their feed alley, there's only one way around into lay down on the far end of the barn, or the far end of the picture that we're looking at right now. And there's a one-way gate down on that end too, so that they have to make the loop. So every animal goes through that sort gate. We can milk who we want, when we want, and as often as we want. And if that holding area is full, well, we'll just kick them out and they can come back later. So identical thing, except on the other, this would be like on the opposite side of the barn is what we're looking right now. So 2 60 group pens. I guess one right now has 90 cows in it or 100 cows in it, so 60 to 90. Here we're waiting. There's a holding area that is going down into where the robot is. One of the things that with that holding area, when we replaced the robots 2 years ago now, I really decreased the size of that holding area. Made it so it was like 4 or 5 animals are all that's fitting in there, and really angled that down, or made it so it'd be down into it, so that there's no place for animals to stand. That once they kind of get in there, they're just kind of almost not quite single file, but they get funneled into it. And I felt that really helped with heifers going through more or earlier on their own, and it really cut back on fetch cows on it too, I felt. Whereas in a larger holding area or a larger holding pen, that they would kind of stand in corners, or especially heifers or timid cows would have a harder time kind of getting themselves through there. So right at the kind of the bottom or the front of the picture here, so when we exit out, we walk cows through a footbath right after the robot, so everyone automatically walks through a footbath right there. And I think that's worked out great for us. I really like that location. It doesn't seem to impact cow traffic out of the BMS at all on it. I know we were told that was a no-no to do when we built in the first place, and I really like it. Twice a week we can fill it up, and we never have to, walk the whole herd around at a time in order to get everyone through it in a timely fashion. And then we can sort. So there's a sort pen, which would be like right in the very front of the picture here, that when they leave the VMS, we can sort out selected animals that we want to work with or anything like that. And that was something that I thought I was going to utilize a lot more when we built. We did not put stalls into it, but I really use it just for drying cows off, cull cows, or when I want to have animals sorted out for hoof trimming. Otherwise, vet checks, breedings, things like that, we do mainly in the headlock. So something that I wouldn't want to live without, but we use it a lot less than what I would have anticipated. Again, this is holding areas, but now that we added a third unit or a second unit into one of the pens. And so exit gates coming out of them, and right on the left-hand side would be where a selection gate is. We can't quite see it, we're just seeing part of it right there. And that is the holding area, and cows waiting to get into where the two into both of the VMS. Just a little bit more overview of the barn. So like I said, it's a 6-row. So on our intake side is dry cows, a pen of spring heifers, and a fresh pen. And it was kind of an afterthought. We had a little extra room, and I ended up putting in and keeping all of our new calves until weaning right in the corner of the barn, and it actually works out really great. I thought we were going to have respiratory issues on it, and it is not the case at all. So works out pretty well, and at weaning, then they leave the barn and are gone to a heifer grower. So, and the last one, this would just be that sort area that I talked about, so we can sort cows out into here. So there's a gate right at the bottom, sort out, and anybody else goes or can walk back through a finger gate and into the feed alley. And
Okay, I think those are the pictures we had. Great overview, about exact 10 minutes. Good job, Jeremy. One thing we didn't mention is that you guys bad with sand, right? So again, sometimes that can make a difference in terms of maintenance costs and all those kind of things. But
correct.
So Jim, do you want to join us? And we'll see if we have questions coming up. Looks like we have one. Okay, so person here asking, I apologize, I may have missed it. How many cows do you milk?
160 right now.
And then you have the 3 robots.
Correct.
Okay.
What's your goal for the kind of a follow-up, Jeremy? What would be your goal? Is that kind of full for you, or is that limited based on stalls, or you want to comment on that?
We are installing a 4th unit this fall, and at that point we will be limited based on stalls. We will have robot capacity there, but we'll be limited based on stalls, which I've really learned to kind of love almost. That I feel we can get a lot more turns out of heifers. It was installing that 3rd unit and having the robot underutilized, I think is been just tremendous on what it's done for cows and what it's done for milking stuff. So we are installing a 4th one. I think the goal, or with where we are currently with facilities and in the barn, we would be probably that 190 to 200 cow range, and I'm pretty comfortable with that.
So 200 for the 4. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So somebody's asking here, and this is probably a question from Europe or Canada, how many liters per robot per day? So if you don't know liters, you can tell us pounds, and I can calculate per robot.
Pounds per robot?
Yep.
Well, I would say there's a little bit of a difference because we have, a pen that has 60 in the, or, is milking 60 and doing, 45 or whatever.
Sure.
Our 61 is at 7,200 pounds right now a day. And our other one looks like 5,500 or so a piece.
Okay, so the first one was about 3,300 kilos. And could you say the second one again? Sorry.
About 5,500.
5,500.
And that is about 45 cows per.
But that's
robot.
small. Yeah, we don't have, that one's not to capacity. So it's kind of maybe not fair to say.
We'll never reach milking capacity on that one.
Right, exactly. So maybe the 3,300 kilos or 7,200 pounds for the other 2, right? So
what is that pounds or energy corrected? You just want to go through some metrics. There's a few questions on metrics. So you want to go through that, like visits and pounds of milk per cow and somatic cell count, kind of the usual things people kind of like to know.
Yep. So just the basics on that. The goal or the benchmark has always been 7 pounds a sow. So whether we get 100 pounds or the 4.0 and a 3.0, whatever, 7 has always been the benchmark, and that's where I always expect to be at. Right now, so again, there's a little difference just with the two groups, but as a farm average, our 7-day average is 110 pounds of milk right now. We are at a 3.8 and a 2.95. So I would expect to see those components kind of increase here as we go through fall a little bit. Cell count, year average is 160 on those. Turns per day, right now we are at 3.1 visits per cow, which is a little bit skewed because we're at 3.6 on the group that is underutilized, and we're at a 2.2 on the other one. So
3.6. Wow.
2.6. Yep.
Interesting.
It's we saw a 10-pound increase on that pen, and we gained 1.2 milkings a cow, and we saw a 10-pound increase, and I think so far it's working out.
Interesting. And where do you have your waterers in the barn, which we couldn't see in the picture, but
Our water, that was the biggest, that is a concern. So there are 4 waters per pen. So in one side, or, you know, now for 90 cows, there's 4 waters. And they are located, there's one right on either end. So one right after they walk out of a robot, one right when they walk around to go eat, or like when they walk around after they eat. There's one on each side located in the center of the barn. So on the feed alley and then on the stall alley, I guess I would say. That is eliminating, and I wouldn't say limiting factor. I thought it would be more of a limiting factor. Going into it, I know our inches per cow of water, a bit space availability or whatever, that we were very low on it, and then we overcrowded, and it does not seem to have impacted anything at all this, you know, going through summer, going through July with any heat or anything like that. So I don't think that's going to be a problem going forward.
Okay.
Now, I think another question that we've got here, Jeremy, is that a lot of question, we get a lot about this, is why did you decide on D-Labels and why did you decide on guided flow?
So when I started looking at it, really in our area, there were 2 options, a D-Label and a Lely. At that time in 2014 and 2015, I thought that the dealership support was maybe a little less so on the Lely side of it. And at that time, and I know it's come a long way, I couldn't see any, or I could not really look at any herds or find any herds that were where I would expect it to be in terms of production wise. With the Lely brand around here. I mean, everything was, people were very happy with it and stuff, but I guess it just wasn't where I'd expected to be on production on it. And then with the guided flow, I know that free flow works and guys make it work all over the place, but I just don't understand how you get late lactation fat cows that are ready to go dry, how they don't turn into fetch cows. I'm very happy with the guided flow, and just that it basically eliminates any kind of fetch animal. I mean, unless they have a sore foot or unless they're a new heifer, I don't touch them.
Interesting. Following up on this heifer comment you just made, how long does it take for you to train your average heifer?
The first 3 milkings, I really have to push to get them through, and my goal is by about 2 to 3 weeks that they're on their own. Usually about 2 weeks, we can be pretty much on their own. And undercrowding it is huge. So when we see that we're undercrowded on the robot capacity, so they're not fighting to get in there, the robots have a lot more idle time on them. Heifers take to it and they train so much. I mean, there's so much faster training on it. So I think that in the past, or what I had done in the past of, you know, trying to get that 7,000 pounds or 7,500 pounds out of a unit, we sacrifice at the expense of heifers. I felt like, and getting them trained and getting them through there 4 times a day. And so they take off and they train much better when there's a lot more robot idle time.
Okay. Maybe you can just follow up, Jim, with the same thing about fetching, since we're kind of on the topic, rather than jumping to the other one, if you don't mind. The second question here.
Yeah. How often are you fetching cows? What's your criteria for a fetch cow? And kind of sort of along the same line is one of the concerns with guided flow that you hear a lot is that, well, there's going to be a cow end up in that commitment pen, and she's going to be there for 10 hours or 8 hours, and she doesn't have feed. That is really the number one sales point, I think of people putting in free flow versus guided flow. So do you want to, how do you manage that? Has that been an issue? Kind of goes along with fetching, but kind of how do you deal with those fetch cows? How often do you get them?
Fetch cows, I do twice a day. So I do a morning and a night. I would say that I'm the only person that works with cows. So there's kind of a flowing criteria of who's going to be fetched or not. Anybody that is probably less than 100 days in milk and is 12 hours out or something like that, I'm going to get. But we see very, very few of those. Anybody, if they're 250 days out of milk or anything like that, and they're 10, 12, 14 hours out, I don't even bother going to get them. They know how to go through, they can figure it out. When they're hungry, they'll go through. We fetch very few cows. First lactation heifers when I'm training is the biggest thing. They just don't exist. If they want to go eat, they're going to go through the robot. Yes, there are times, and I've had it happen before, where a cow or especially a new heifer will get in there at night, and they can stand there. I have the sort gate permission set to kind of change that until you know. I mean, you'll know if there's an animal that's not trained or that's not ready yet. So I call it. So on the sort gate, there's a selection gate going into that holding area that no new heifers, until I give them permission, can go in there between 7 at night and 3 in the morning. So they cannot stand there in that time. And then if they go in at 3 in the morning, well, I'm out at 4 or 5 anyway, so I'll walk them through. And then that is how I try to prevent any new heifers, especially, from getting stuck in that holding area for 8 hours or something like that. And I guess if you're a late lactation cow and you decide you're going to stand there, I mean, you know what to do. We've done it hundreds of times before. So
we let them fend for themselves, right, Jeremy? They figure it out.
Yeah,
that's not all bad either.
Very, very, very infrequent.
So usually it doesn't happen, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I don't think, maybe the answer is no, but I'm going to ask, are you running the OCC, to measure somatic cell count?
No.
Yeah, that's still in test as far as I know in the US and not approved officially. So would you be willing to install those when it becomes available? You think would be useful?
If it proved itself to, I mean, yes, I would consider it. I would absolutely consider it, guys.
So the next question is, are there any challenges with having guided flow? Even more specifically, you want to comment on sand and maintenance costs, or just your thoughts on sand in robot barns?
Sand is awesome until the second that it leaves the stall. I like sand from a cow comfort standpoint, from what I feel like it does. I mean, we just don't have it. Seems to not be an issue of like swollen hocks or swollen knees or anything like that. So in that sense, I think that it's fantastic. It is harder on everything else in the barn, on alley scrapers, on the robots themselves. It is harder. I do think that things wear more, and on the deal valve, I mean, it's a gripper in the arm, kind of, there's some pivot points on that. And those do wear a little bit faster. I know one of the things that you mentioned was like repair costs on it, things like that. I kind of went back and looked, and I would say that in the 13 to 14-ish thousand dollar range is about an annual cost for chemical labor and maintenance per unit in sand. And I would really think that if you didn't have sand, that could be a fair amount less, because sand really wears the arms on those pretty substantially on it. I often wonder a little bit too, one of the things that we didn't really, or I guess I didn't really think of going into it, was there's never a good way to really groom stalls or to add sand or to keep them nice and level and keep cows laying perfect, because you have to move the entire pen out at a time in order to get to it. The pen is never empty, like if you're milking in a parlor. So that kind of is, I wouldn't say it has challenges, but I don't keep stalls as level and as nice as maybe you would like to. So I go through and I do every 5 days, I add sand to it. I groom them and add sand. And in the winter that gets pushed back to a week just because of freezing issues and things like that with sand when it's delivered. But I often wonder when I go through, like, I wonder how mattress barns work. Just because by day 5, you can tell cows start laying a little bit different, or there's a little more manure underneath them, that if mattresses would have an advantage that they're always positioned perfectly in the stalls. So sand is great, but it has a lot of challenges that go with it.
Definitely great for cow comfort, but harder for the producers managing it. So It's a tough one. So could you just walk through for us how you manage your milk quality in terms of, other health and checking for that, and do you use the health reports, and how do you find if a cow has problems or not, and what's your steps you take there?
Specifically udder related, if we're looking at udder related, I don't really use very many reports on Delta Pro or the program that's here itself. I mean,
okay.
I use precious little on it. I tend to go through and just look at incomplete cows, and if there's an incomplete quarter for maybe like 2 or 3 consecutive milkings, that's how I really know that, that, okay, so there's an issue on that quarter, that there's something incomplete on. And knock on anything, and I'm going to jinx this, but once we've made that switch to the 300s, mastitis really hasn't been an issue on it. So we're on almost 2 years now since we treated a case of mastitis. There'll be 2 years in October, and we stopped dry treating any cows last October. So we're almost a full year without any dry treating, and we're almost a full year without a single mastitis treatment. So I honestly don't even pay attention to mastitis anymore.
Interesting. Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, well, until tonight when it blows up, but
no, I mean, it can happen, but it's yeah. But you're growing from within too, right? You're not buying a lot of cows, or are you?
We buy in when we added like 30 more cows here a few months ago. I bought most of those.
You did buy some, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I wonder if sand helps that out too some. I mean, although there's some farms that have somatic cell count issues with sand too, but I would guess you use fresh sand, and so maybe it is a trade-off. Maybe it's more repair costs and maybe less mastitis and less dealing with mastitis cows. So. And
he's talking about the new system being a better attachment, faster attachment, maybe better stimulation. Who knows? I mean, that maybe contributes to that too. Any other questions from you, Jim? Anything we forgot? Let's see. We talked about feeding. What are you feeding in the robot? I mean, you're feeding corn gluten pellets or actual formulated pellets? What is your feed in there, and how much you're feeding?
We are feeding corn gluten pellets right now. We switched back to that a few months ago. We had been just feeding a ground corn and soybean meal mixture, and it just priced in corn gluten. We needed the extra digestibility, so we switched back to corn gluten on it. We are feeding about 7 pounds a day through there right now. 7.2 pounds a day is our average feeding rate. So I think 3 pounds per visit is our maximum allowable.
So that's the maximum. And what's your late lactation cows? What do they get?
Oh, they get barely anything. Just enough to make them come in there. And if it's weird out. If there's speed that's never there, if something ever happens and plugs, like nobody will go through. So you have to have something. But
a little bit.
Tail off quite a bit, and I think we're at 2 pounds a visit is their max.
Okay, excellent. So, Jim, we have a minute for a final question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because it sounded like you fed a meal before you started with these pellets. Was that correct? You said ground corn and soy. Did you see any challenges with that? People sure ponder that and kind of go back and forth. So did you see a change when you went to pellets and or back and forth?
No. We actually went through the transition. When we started, we had a pelleted feed, and just for cost reasons, we switched to gluten. Years ago, and it just seemed with loads of gluten you would get all kinds of fines in it from time to time. And we had one load and it was almost all fines, and at that point I just said, well, why aren't we just using soybean meal or something else that's cheaper? And we fed that for 3 or 4 years, just fine, meal and ground corn, and it worked out just fine. We ended up adding a little bit of oil of some sort to decrease like dust with it, a little bit in that, but we never had a clogging issue, and I did not see any visits or anything like that tick up when we went back to a pelleted gluten again. So there's 0 issues with it in my mind.
I don't know if we have time, but you want to come in on your PMR at all? What's in it? Do you see a lot of changes? Does that stay pretty consistent? Do you see changes in visits or milk as forage quality changes, kind of composition, corn silage, hay, haylage?
I do have time. I mean, noon is not my deadline.
Yeah, but I need to maybe stop the recording pretty soon here, so I stay in my 30 minutes. But quickly, and then I'll go ahead.
Yeah, so the PMR, we do see that stays very consistent. There's a lot more, in my opinion, there's a lot more power to what's in that in terms of driving cows through than what I think that we realize. And I think that's something that the guided flow really, or the free flow maybe has to focus a little bit more on. And I think there's a lot of power there that being guided, we don't quite tap into. So
that's very true. So we can continue a little bit more of the discussion if we need, Jim, but I'd like to thank everyone for attending this episode of 30 Minutes Robotic Milking Edition. I want to especially thank Jeremy, who was our guest today. Thank you for joining us, Jeremy, and invite all of you to come back for episode 21 on September 15. So thank you for your attention, and we'll stop the recording.